Okay. So Genesis 13, and that's just on page 14 of the Bibles provided. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And if you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. Amen. We'll end the reading of God's word there. So if you just keep the Bible open there at Genesis 13, we'll be looking at that throughout. So a band that I used to listen to a lot as a teenager, a band called Megadeth, cheery band. They've got an album called Peace Sells, but Who's Buying? And there's many interpretations of what that all means and what that all entails. But the title itself speaks loudly of a world at conflict, and everyone pointing the finger at one another, but no one really taking responsibility. It's everyone else's fault. It's everyone else's problem. Peacemakers are hard to find. We all want peace, but it's very often on our own terms. Today is the day and age of self-affirmation, of bossing it, where you're raised to think of primarily you and prioritize you. But the problem is, of course, when you meet a whole host of other people who have also been raised to think the same way, only about themselves, then you have conflict. It's my life, my way. But then you meet Jim over here who also thinks, no, it's my life, my way. And then you meet Sarah over here who says, no, it's my life, my way. What happens when they meet? Conflict. Because so often we're focused on our own priorities. If someone criticizes me, challenges me, even in a loving way, I blow up at them, I gaslight them, I run away from their criticism. In short, the gospel, according to me, myself, and I, doesn't get us very far in life. But rather here with Abram, we have a different way shown to us, a different way opening up to us. Abram, rather than insisting on his own way, he passes that on. And the reason for this is not that he's a particularly superior chap morally, or he's particularly enlightened, but that in the promises of God, he finds something far greater than his own way. And in the same way, that's what enables us to follow the Lord and to follow his way in our lives, rather than insisting on our own way. Because in the promises of God, we have something far greater and far superior than that. We see where Abram's focus is as the chapter begins and ends with worship. We see in verse 4 where he had first built an altar to the Lord in the north, and then when we get to the south in verse 18, there he builds an altar to the Lord. And that's where his priorities are. That's where his focus is in the Lord and in his promises. And it shapes him wherever he is, whatever he does. That is what shapes him. The fact that he is a worshipper of the Lord shapes his very life, as it is supposed to be with each and every one of us. And the way that we see it today is in peacemaking. His peacemaking is a result of his faith in the Lord. You see, worship is a powerful act. It lifts our gaze away from ourselves, where it is often, and up to God, to where he is. And because he trusts and worships the Lord, because he's trusting in God's promises for something far superior, ultimately it's not the end of the world that he isn't insisting on his own way. He can lay that aside for one moment because a better way is opened up to him. And in doing all of this, he is Abram the peacemaker. In answer to the title of that album, Peace Sells But Who's Buying? Abram is. Abram's after it because he has a priceless treasure that is his, that he's looking ahead to, which means that earthly treasures, temporary short wins, are not his priority. So we're going to look at this passage through 4 headings. First of all, trouble brewing, trouble eased, trouble ahead, and then trouble free. So trouble brewing in the first 7 verses. We arrive here in verses 1 and 2 after last week. If you were here with us, you'll remember Abram was in Egypt after a famine. So he's left Egypt after that particular episode. He goes to the Negev, to the south, heading to the land that God was going to give him, that God promised him back in the first few verses of chapter 12. He goes with his wife, with his nephew Lot, and we read in verse 2 that Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and in gold. It's a long way from chapter 12 and verse 10 where there's a famine in Egypt, and here by Genesis 13 and verse 2, Abraham now has livestock and wealth built up. Materially, he's blessed to have what he has, but this tale even here is a reminder that even blessings can bring problems, can bring challenges for us. Having children, for example, is a great blessing. Children also like to draw on the walls. Having and owning your own home that's paid for, you don't owe anyone any money, that's a great blessing to be in that position. But things break in your house, and it's your responsibility then to fix those things that get broken. Verse 5, Lot too has possessions. So Abram and Lot, both blessed with possessions, with material wealth, dwelling together in the same land. And that here is a great blessing for both of them, but that is what's bringing conflict here. That's what's bringing the trouble between the two of them. Because we read in verse 6 that the land could not support both of them while they stayed, because their possessions were too great. They had so much livestock, they had so many herdsmen, so much that it was hard to stay together. And so for that reason, conflict arises. And from there, Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen, they begin to fight. They begin to argue over bits of land, over whatever. To quote Fred Astaire, there may be trouble ahead. There's so many of each one's herdsmen, there's so much of each one's livestock, that actually this is becoming troublesome. It's overcrowded. There's not enough land to support that many animals and that many people. It got me thinking about family holidays with parents, grandparents and all the rest, and grandkids. It's lovely, it's really nice, but obviously it's a lot of people to fit into the one house. And all of a sudden you're bringing together 2 different types of schedules. Maybe you eat at different times, or maybe you watch different things in the evening on the television, and all of a sudden there's conflict. And it depends how your family deals with conflict. Maybe you kind of are of the family that you brush under the carpet and everyone's secretly ticked off with each other, but it's not really much of a secret because there's passive-aggressive comments and all sorts. Or you're the type of family which digs everything up and everything is an argument and everything's a fight. But it's the same here, and it spills over into conflict with fighting and with arguing, and it's got the potential to just go all kinds of wrong between Abram and Lot. They have so much, but that so much is bringing conflict and bringing trouble. You think of where the conflict can so easily end up here if it goes the wrong way. Harsh words spoken in the heat of the moment. Someone being assaulted, their life being taken, one of their livestock going missing. Relationships ruined forever. This is where it could possibly end. On to our second point, and kind of the biggest point, trouble eased in verses 8 and 9. With all this brewing and all of this simmering under the surface, how's it going to go from here? What's the way forward for Abram and Lot? It's going to be the equivalent of like the WWE Royal Rumble match. There's 30 guys in the ring, they're all fighting it out, and Abram and Lot are shouting from the sides. No. It actually goes completely the opposite way. Abram says in verse 8, let's not have any quarrelling between you and me, between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. How refreshing. In family conflict, how refreshing it is when instead of pouring fuel on the fire, one says to the other, this is nuts. We're family. What are we doing arguing? What are we doing fighting here, turning on each other? And Abram offers a sensible, workable solution. He in essence says, look around you, look at the land that's before you. Let's part company. There's no space for you and for me to dwell in the same place. Let's separate. If you want, you can go left and I'll go right. If you want to go right, I'll go left. It's up to you. What do you want? In this episode, Abram is an embodiment of the proverb, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Here, Abraham totally diffuses the situation by presenting a workable solution. Abram could have dialed up the temperature in the conflict, or, as it is here, he diffuses the situation. But it could have gone completely wrong in another direction. What if Abram says, hold on, these are my men, this is my herd, get your hands off them now. He could even have pulled rank. So back to Genesis 12, God makes the promises to Abraham, the nations are going to be blessed through you. You're going to be my guy. Abraham could have been like, no, the promised blessings are going to come through me, Lot. I'm the significant one. I'm the important one. I'm going to take the land to the left, and you're going to have to like it or lump it. The scene has so much potential for an explosion of conflict. How much more so if Abraham dug his heels in? But no, he instead doesn't insist on his own way, but chooses the path of peace. Very often we operate on a my life, my rules, my way type mindset. We run a group now and again called Hope Explored, and Rico Tyson, the video on the session on peace, says what happens then when we all meet. You know, if it's my life, my rules, and my life, my rules, what happens when we meet? Conflict, right? It finds itself in always having to be right in an argument, or always having to have the last word in an argument. It may be that you ask, as Abram does here, what do you want to do? But then unlike Abram, you're secretly cheesed off because the other person's chosen the option that you didn't want them to choose. It may be when someone in love challenges you or corrects you, you get offended, you get your back up, and so you can't receive it. We often want peace, but only on our own terms. But here Abraham chooses the opposite. He diffuses the situation. Instead of insisting on his own way, he insists Lot has the choice. It shows us here that sometimes we're actually called to give up our own rights for the sake of peace. Not always, but sometimes. Sometimes we could do with that as human beings. If it's not a sake of injustice, if it's not compromising on someone's conscience, then we can give up our rights sometimes. We can swallow our pride and prefer the other person rather than ourselves for a moment. Paul writes in Philippians 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility value others above yourself. Not looking to your own interests, but also looking to the interests of others. Valuing others above yourselves means stopping insisting on your own way all the time. It doesn't always have to be my way or the highway. Husbands, are you the first to say sorry in an argument? And it may very well be, in terms of what is right, to sound like a child for a moment, it might very well be that she started it. Who knows? But you continued it. You're still in an argument, right? Are you going to be the first to say sorry? And instead of like, well, I'm just going to wait for her to come to me, being the first to go and apologise. Wives, the slogan, Mrs. Always Right. That's my heading. Popular culture tells you like that's really funny and that's quite a good thing. But like your husband's not there for you to one-up him every day and to lord over him every day. Church members, instead of feeling hard done by that, no one's come and spoken to you after the service, look around, see is there anyone that you can go and speak to. It's your right to feel aggrieved by that. You shouldn't be on your own. But sometimes we're called not to insist on our own rights and actually to go and to make peace with others. Employee, once you've got your work done at the end of the week, sure, it's your right to sort of toss about and scroll for ages, but you could maybe go ask your fellow employees or your boss how you can help. Your work's done, it's your right to pause, to stop, to take it easy, but how can you serve others in love? And the result of this, of not always insisting on our own way, is peace. There's something about being the person to make the first step in a conflict which achieves peace, which dials everything down a ton. There's a verse that stayed with me since the first time I read it. It's Romans 12:18, where Paul says, live at peace with others as much as depends on yourself. And there's such wisdom in that, because we can't control how other people respond to us. We can't control what people say. We can't control what people do, but we can control how we respond to them and how we interact with them. We can seek to respond in ways that foster peace and restoration in our relationships. I get it. When someone does something unkind or unthoughtful, says something out of turn, it's not right, it's not good. But rather than insisting in our own way and going, nah, they're going to have to come to me, we can go forward in love and make peace. What we see in Abraham is the blessed path of peacemaking. That in a time of conflict, he is the one who goes and takes the first initiative to bring peace. Whilst we aren't bare exemplarists who are looking to the Bible only for moral examples on how we live our lives, if you want that, Jordan Peterson's more likely your guy. Nonetheless, we do draw positive examples from the Bible. Hebrews 12 is full of it. Hebrews 11, rather. Examples of how we are to live. Examples of how we are to go about our lives. And herein lies one, peacemaking. Now we're going to get onto the point as to how we're able to be peacemakers and why Abram's able to prefer Lot over himself and say, you pick. We'll get onto that in our last point. But before we do, the narrative is kind of interrupted ever so slightly in our third point, trouble ahead, verses 10 to 13. So Abram says, Lot, you choose. You go right, I'll go left. You go left, I'll go right. And it says there in verse 10, Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. And so he picks that. Lot chose for himself, verse 11, the whole plain of the Jordan, and set out toward the east. Abram, meanwhile, he goes the opposite way. He goes to live in Canaan, which would be the land where God has chosen for him. We read in verse 13 that the people of Sodom were sinning greatly against the Lord. So Lot chooses the land which looks most prosperous, looks most inviting. It looks like the best pick. It makes most sense. He's looking out and thinking, for my flocks and my herds, this is going to be amazing. Look at how luscious and how wonderful and how colourful the land is. It's just like Eden. It's perfect. But all is not well in Sodom, as we read in our passage here. Actually, the beautiful and lush scenery is a cover for something murky lurking beneath the shadows. The bright, colourful and vibrant land of Sodom was no more than a front for a society that was decaying and crumbling and falling apart. Now, we'll not get onto the sin of Sodom in particular right now, because that's coming up in weeks to come. But all is not well in Sodom. Now, there's nothing to suggest that Lot is making a moral or a spiritual decision here as he's choosing the land. It just seems to be the most common sense decision. It looks to be perfect, but his eyes have deceived him. The option that looks the best and the most prosperous for him ultimately ends up opening a whole can of worms for him. A bit like a naive car buyer going into a car showroom of a bent car dealer, and the car dealer's polished the car up. It looks dead nice, but underneath the bonnet there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on. It looks in perfect condition, but the reality is it's anything but. That's what Sodom is. It looks good on the surface. It looks like it's going to be a brilliant and perfect place, but it's anything but. Canaan is the land that God indeed gives Abraham and his descendants, but in choosing Sodom, Lot inadvertently forfeits that blessing of the promised land. But before we think, poor Lot, he's walked in blind and he didn't know what he was getting himself in for, as we will continue on in the coming weeks, we'll actually see Lot's life patterns after Sodom quite considerably. He chooses the way of Sodom, not just here in terms of where he's going to dwell, but he actually chooses that in terms of the life that he lives. Whilst Abram's life is mostly one of peace and the promises of God, Lot's life gets thrown into complete chaos just from the decision of pitching his tent near Sodom. The end of Sodom is clear, verse 10. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Judgment, destruction is going to fall on Sodom. And in Sodom is a lesson about trifling with sin. Sin is appealing and attractive to us. That's why we do it. We might want to take a kind of a pious, no, it is. That's why we do it. We fool around with lust because we long for pleasure, but it only ends up us feeling empty. We dabble with pride because we long to be important, but we've never felt less significant in the process. We grow envious of others because what they have, and we long to be satisfied, but we only end up feeling more and more empty, more and more discontent with our lives. But more than that of what sin makes us feel, it's what sin does in our relationship between us and God. It's not just the moment we indulge or the dreaded aftermath, it's where sin ultimately leads us if we live a life following that course rather than the Lord's. Proverbs 5 speaks so powerfully of sin when it talks about the adulterous woman. The adulterous woman is sin and folly personified, really. So it says that, she calls you in, she beckons you in, her lips drip honey, how enticing. But in the end, she is as bitter as gall, her feet go down to death, her steps to the grave. Sin feels good at the time, but we'd be mistaken for thinking that sin is good, or that sin leads anything good, or sin does anything good. Sin promises so much, but it delivers very little. It delivers nothing at all. It ruptures our relationship with others, with ourselves, and most importantly, with God. And it's because of sin that judgment is going to fall on Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's because of sin that judgment will fall on all who fail to turn to him in repentance and faith. Now, God isn't a fly off the handle, unreasonable, unjust God who's just looking to shower down judgment and vengeance whenever he gets the opportunity. He actually wants for people to turn to him and to find life. Ezekiel 33, God says to Ezekiel, Say to them, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live. Turn from your evil ways. Why will you die? And so in Sodom is a warning for us if we're in a period of backsliding or apathy. It's a warning for us if we haven't yet turned to the Lord, that this is where sin leads us to, where a life apart from the Lord leads us to is judgment. But it's not because God is trigger happy. It's not because God is unjust. It's not because God is quite keen and eager to find opportunities to judge. On the contrary, he's quite eager to find opportunities to forgive and show mercy. He wants us to turn. He takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. And so friends, if that is you walking far from the Lord today, turn back, come back, and instead of pursuing death, find life. Find life in the one true and living God. Lastly, we're going to, in our fourth point, see trouble-free. Now, picking up again from point number 2, if we remember Abram the peacemaker, what we want to avoid is just bare moralism, bare example following. If that's what it is, then it belongs more in Aesop's fables than it does the Bible. By not insisting on his own way, Abraham calmed the conflict and brought peace. Go and do likewise. That's Aesop's fable, but that's not what the story wants us to primarily go away with. We want to know what on earth gives Abram the power to be not so insistent on his own way all the time. What gives Abram the power to be able to say, no, not my way, but to give that up to Lot, selflessly. And that's because Abram's focus is quite clearly elsewhere. His focus isn't on how he can hoover up as much material and temporary blessings for himself as he possibly can. His focus is on the blessing that God has already promised him. Back in Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3, the promises of a land where he will dwell, of children and offspring, and of blessing to the nations through him. Promises which are in fact reiterated here in verses 14 to 17. It's almost a sort of a confirmation of Abram's faithfulness in verses 1 to 13, that in verses 14 to 17, God reiterates those promises. He reaffirms his commitment to those promises. Verses 14 and 15, look around you. As far as the eye can see, this land is yours, and to your offspring forever. That's the promise of land. Verse 16, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. And so, Genesis 12, there's promises of offspring, but here God's ramping it up even further. He's like, go try and count the dust of the earth. That's how many your descendants are going to be. Like innumerable. And as a sign of God giving it to Abram, he says, go on and take a walk. Take a walk around this land, it's yours. It's a bit like when a parent gives the keys to a car for their child when they pass their test. Go on, take it for a spin. It's yours. God is doing the same thing here. Go for a walk around the land. This is the land that I am going to give to you. It's yours. And that's what gives Abram then the peace to be a peacemaker with Lot here. God has promised him the most wonderful blessings. And so he doesn't need to fret about every square inch of material gain or loss he may incur here. Abram can choose peace with Lot instead of conflict, instead of fighting over worldly treasures, because he believes God has promised him something far better and far greater than anything he may gain here. And to close, so it is for us as believers today. Like, I'm exhorting you, this passage exhorts all of us to be peacemakers. You think, well, how on earth do I do that? I kind of like being right in arguments all the time. I kind of like when my spouse comes tail between their legs to say sorry. I kind of like feeling justified in my anger. Well, the answer is quite simply that, like Abram, because we believe in God's promise for something far greater, we can lose out gladly here on earth for whatever we do have to lose out on, because we know that what is to come is far greater. The God of all the universe loves you with an everlasting love, and therefore you don't need to chase approval of others. The God of all the universe accepts you through faith in what Jesus has done. So you don't need to go and prove yourself by posting your highlight reel on Instagram. The God of all the universe in the new creation has a life so much better for us, so greater for us than any earthly blessing that we can get for ourselves. So we don't need to fear what we lose out on in this life. We don't even need to fear death, because we know that the other side of death for the believer is entry into lasting and eternal joy. What is to come is so much better. And that's the basis for peacemaking and conflict. You don't always have to be right. You don't always have to be on the winning side, because your life is no longer bound up with me, myself, and I, but with God, whose promises are far superior. Let's pray.